Guys, it's Quana back again with another review. Hope you guys are doing awesome. Alright, so here we are to talk about The Handmaid's Tale Season 5 Episode 6 entitled Together. This has got to be one of my favorite episodes, not just for the season, but for the series. This episode was so gratifying in so many different ways, and we get a lot of payoffs that for things that have already taken place, and a lot of movement for what's to come. A lot of things that I've been predicting would kind of put things in play, I think, for the remainder of the season, because we do have 4 more episodes remaining. So hopefully you had an opportunity to watch this episode. I am sorry that this video is a little bit late, but I did get a chance to watch the episode twice. So hopefully I will have more details, more nuances to be able to add into this video, so we can really spark some conversation around what we love about this show, what we think is going to happen, what's going on, and just, how you feeling after this episode. It's always, last week's episode was a fairly short episode, and I was happy with the way that things were in play, but it wasn't as satisfying of an episode. This episode left me with a smile on my face because I can see things in motion, and I like that. I like when plot details come together to move the plot along. I love that. I love that. I love that. So if you haven't had an opportunity to watch this episode and you do not want to be spoiled, don't worry, you can always save this video and come back to it later. Maybe check out my video from last week's episode. But if you've had an opportunity to watch this episode, go ahead and jump down in those comments right away. Let me know all of your thoughts, all of your opinions, and please, let's dialogue about this episode. And don't forget, most importantly, to click the subscribe button. It really gives me a little boost of encouragement. And if you're already signed into YouTube, why not? Why not come spend some time with me over here? Let me tell you, first and foremost, the day that I watched this episode, we had just gotten back from Disney, which was like a 9-10 hour drive. So I was on Twitter, and as Hulu, Handmaids on Hulu was asking like who's staying up to watch the episode, I was like, there's just no way in the world my old tail is going to be able to stay up and watch this episode. But I fought the good fight and managed to watch the episode, even though I sprained a ligament in my knee. So I was like propped up with a bag of ice on my knee watching the episode. But let me tell you, I'm so glad that I did. So I'm going to kind of start where the episode starts in my recap. I may start to kind of just combine some stories to sum some things up a little quicker. Don't worry, we'll get all the main beats. So this episode starts almost right away. We're getting into Serena, and Serena is going downstairs. I love those overhead shots that the series continues to give us when they're walking down the staircases. The difference between the circular and spiral and oval staircases of Gilead versus the very square boxy staircase of the Wheeler's home. They are almost plain at being Gilead, but not quite. And Serena finds herself in Gilead, even though, as she says later in the episode, it's not really Gilead, is it? She goes downstairs where she's supposed to be meeting with her OBGYN to go to his office to have a physical for her appointment. Dr. Landers sounds like Flanders, and he was definitely giving me some weird, creepy Flanders vibes from The Simpsons, like kind of happy-go-lucky, but in a very weird, uncomfortable type of way. And he's like, oh, we don't have to go anywhere for your appointment. We're going to stay right here. She goes up to the attic where they have laid out a birthing room for her, complete with OBGYN stirrups and everything. This should be ringing alarm bells off, and you can see the sheer panic. Serena is someone who always tries to keep herself very composed, keep her emotions very close to her vest, but you can see in her eyes that she is afraid, and she has right to be so. And in the midst of this man giving her a full-on physical, meaning he is up in her hoo-ha, trying to, do her, all of her scans and everything else, he asked her on a date. ew. Like, who wants to be dating their OB? Like, you've seen my nether regions. No, thank you. She plays it off because, of course, she doesn't want to ring any alarms, but obviously this is very distressing for her. And later on in the episode, she goes downstairs and she's talking with Mrs. Wheeler, and they're in the garden and they're pruning, doing the things that the good wives do, you know, pruning their flowers and making things look lovely. And they start to talk about this date invitation that she has from Dr. Landers, and Miss Wheeler goes on about, oh, he was just made the head at University of Toronto and all these different things, like, look how glorious this is. And she's like, yeah, but I'm not going to date my OBGYN. Like, hello, like, this is not even rocket science. This is the norm. Like, people would not be dating their OB. And she's like, you can't raise your baby alone. You'd be a single mother. And she's like, no, I wouldn't. I'd be a widow. It's so funny because the very scriptures that they're using to kind of pervert against the handmaids and to create the system of handmaids in Gilead, they're forgetting about all of the scriptures that would talk about passing on wives onto the next of kin and things of that nature, like wives being seen as property. You know, women have to be really careful about contextualizing and recognizing biblical text as when it's like biblical law versus cultural practices. It's not all one and the same. And these women have not considered the ramifications of how these principles are going to be placed upon them. And Serena is getting her comeuppance in this way because Mrs. Wheeler is like, no, you need to be getting married again, and he's a great catch, so you should certainly consider it. Serena doesn't want to hear anything of that, and so she's like trying to deflect. Let me go for a walk. No, you need to go upstairs and rest. You can just see Miss Wheeler like relishing in the power play that she has. Like, she finally has some power, and she's asserting that power over Serena. And this is what Serena has been doing to June all along. We've seen this throughout the last 4 seasons. So while I don't feel sympathy for her because she's getting what she has put into practice, at the same time, it is still horrifying, the power plays and the power struggles and women using their minimal power that they have over each other because it's like, oh, this is my one little piece of the pie. I need to like keep it close to me. And we know at the end of the day, the Wheelers want Serena's baby. Then we go back to Gilead, where Aunt Lydia shows up, and she is, you know, gotten this call about Esther, and they're supposed to be doing a procedure on Esther, but they can't do it because something has happened. And they're like, oh, what has happened? And she's like faking that she's like really concerned, but she's not, because she still is like feeling vindictive toward Esther for what she did to Janine. And we find out that Esther is pregnant. So it was not just eating and the eating of the chocolate and the way that he was like, Putnam was molesting her, but he actually raped her. I have to say, that was one of the most horrifying scenes, despite the actual acts of rape that we have seen on the show. It was so horrifying because, one, McKenna Grace is such a young actress, and two, it was such a visceral power play, and the standing in of like his thumb in her mouth for like his sexual organ and everything like that. That it's not surprising that that's what happened, but I'm so grateful on the one hand that they chose another avenue to like be more metaphorical about that happening. But now to find out that that is really what happened and that she is impregnated by this man is doubly horrifying. This scene, I will tell you, McKenna Grace acted her behind off. Kudos. Like, she did so well in this scene. And she goes to tell Aunt Lydia, and Aunt Lydia is like, did you do anything to encourage you? And she's like, no, I didn't do anything. And then Aunt Lydia is like horrified, and this is horrific. And she's like, you don't care? Like, you know that this stuff happens. Like, wake up. And it's so funny because between what Lawrence told her last week and then Esther telling her this week, this is finally her wake-up call that the men in Gilead are not the pious, religious, respectful men that you think they are. This whole entire system is corrupted, and it's sickening. And even the system itself, just as a whole, is like sick. These women are not voluntarily giving their bodies to be made into surrogates. These women are forced to do this. They're not chosen by God. They're being raped. And so finally, Aunt Lydia is starting to realize just the depravity of the system. She's still not all the way there yet, but she's getting there. Esther goes off and starts screaming and hollering, full on like Exorcist type of scene. Like I said, she acted her behind off. And so eventually Aunt Lydia goes to talk to Lawrence to tell him what Putnam did. And he's like, so what? I just can't get enough of this man. He's so cold and calculating and callous and cynical in a way that is very pleasing for his character. We know that he's a man who kind of like set these systems in play just because he wanted to leave behind something. It's not that he really believed in the religiosity of it or the system itself. And so now that he's seeing what his metrics have been used for, we see that he's finding these very clever ways to still be himself, but also to go against the grain of the system. And he's using this as a wake-up call to Lydia to kind of get her to do more than what she's been doing to actually help these women. And I love that we're starting to see it, because you never really know where Lawrence's loyalties lie, but it's starting to like be like, well, we can trust him to do X, Y, and Z. And so he's like, what crime did he commit? None. There's no crime here. So there's nothing I can do. Good day. Like basically so dismissive of her. Eventually, he and Nick do, though, however, confront Putnam about it, where he boasting about it like an idiot. Like, oh yeah, I did the thing. I got another kid pregnant. And Lawrence, you better watch out. You better start figuring out a way to get somebody pregnant too. Like, again, the system of Gilead is set up for where he would be pat on the back for doing this. Luckily, we got our boys Nick and Lawrence working together. And so eventually they are able to exact punishment. And we see Putnam and Mrs. Putnam out at dinner, and all of a sudden everyone's whispering about him. And then the eyes show up to arrest him. And he's been brought before a high tribunal, basically. And Nick gets to shoot him. Oh my gosh. Again, such a gratifying sequence of events. Kind of unrealistic. I really wish we kind of knew a little bit more about what they used in order to do this. Because again, as Lawrence said last week, these pious men need a little kink. Like the idea that this is what they do. He had to have basically shown that Putnam, not just in going against the system in a way where, like, obviously, yes, other men have done this, taken advantage of their handmaids, slept with their handmaids when it wasn't time for the sacred ceremony. But Putnam also has a system of doing things and a track record of doing things which has lost him and cost him his arm. So obviously he kind of needed to be put down. But it's interesting because we really don't see the power dynamics in work. But it was a gratifying scene, even though it seems like it was a little unrealistic for what was going on the show. All right, so back in No Man's Land, June and Luke have been captured from last week's episode, which I still say was so stupid for them to even go on this mission in the first place. And they don't know who has them. So they're being questioned. They're in the back of the vehicle. They're being taken away. And Luke is doing all the things to kind of like fight and break his bonds and things like that. He's reminding me so much of Janine the first time we met her in the Red Center, where she mouths off at Aunt Lydia and gets her eye taken off. She hasn't learned how to play the Gilead game. And June has learned, and one would say perhaps mastered, when you can run your mouth against the authorities of Gilead and their subsidiaries, and when you can't do those things. So she, has to kind of basically coach him through this process. Now, the sad thing about all of this, as much as I love Luke, is that a lot of this is all based around his machismo, his desire to be a big man, man up, and to take on danger because his wife has already gone through so much and he hasn't, perhaps in his mind, gone through the levels of which she has gone through. And he kind of let Serena get into his head and play him into this situation. And he's still acting on a lot of that. And June is still having to kind of coach him and say, don't fight, don't do these things, X, Y, and Z. Now, from a structural way, as I watched it the second time, it bothered me all the more because, as someone commented in my last video where or 2 videos ago, where we saw Moira getting hit in the face at the protest outside of the center, and now we're seeing Luke being physically roughhoused and manhandled. We're seeing black bodies again being the most like physically impacted in kind of many ways, and it's definitely disheartening. But I think what's even more disheartening is writing Luke as an American, Black American male. He would have a little bit more nuance about how to handle authority, and especially when there is no way, no chance in HE double hockey sticks that you're going to get out the situation. These men are armed, you are cuffed, there's no way for you to overpower them in this moment. So be a little smarter. And especially with your wife right there, your wife is at risk. So the idea that June is kind of like having to coach him through this, I don't know if for me, if it worked as well, but alas, that is what's happening. And so eventually the guys come in, they ask who they are. She tells them June Osborne. It's so interesting because he's like, no, who are you of? I see your tag. Who do you belong to? Which I still don't know why they never removed her tag from her ear. I have to go back and watch season 4 when she arrives in Canada to see like why they don't ever take her tag, because we know that she took her own tag out back in season 2 when she escaped the first time. So that was a bit bothersome. Of course, obviously, first of all, no, not only does she not belong to anyone because she's a free woman, but also the man who she belonged to was dead. Although the last person she belonged to was Lawrence, if I'm not mistaken. So there is that. But alas, she's like, I don't belong to anybody. As right you should, June. As right you should. And eventually, you know, this whole sequence is just more and more of them being kind of like roughhoused, questioned, Luke getting beat down, her apologizing for him getting beat down, him apologizing for not understanding what she really went through, like not understanding what it would take for her to have gotten through the things that she must have gone through, not just the rape, but everything else. And her apologizing for perhaps not being more forthcoming about really what Gilead was like so that he would be better prepared. There is no being prepared for a place like Gilead, but I would say that it's very interesting because even with last week's episode, this whole idea of like June being violent, and like that violence being a new thing when she's been ensconced in violence for the last 7 years of her life, and one of the most violent regimes ever. Like, come on. And it's kind of it's so naive of June to think she has to apologize for not telling more when it's very obvious from all of the other refugee accounts that probably have been out there, out in the atmosphere. And I think it speaks to us as people when we hear things going on in other places, that it's like we have to keep hearing the story again and again and again because it doesn't resonate until it's actually hitting us personally. And I think that's what's going on with Luke. But Luke in this moment reminded me so much of an early Janine, and just the fact that he doesn't take things seriously and doesn't become calculating. And that is where June and Serena have the edge. They know how to be more calculating in these situations. One of the last scenes we see of June and Luke together, they're reaching between their bars and holding hands. And I don't want to necessarily bring this up because I don't want to get slammed for making this comparison, but it reminded me of so many like Holocaust films, and usually there's a scene where like the people are separated between two different gates and they're like holding hands between it. This kind of reminded me of something like that. And was a very beautiful moment where basically they're talking about how they can get through this. They're in this together. Eventually, however, the men come for them, and they're going to take them onto these vehicles, except for they separate Luke and June. And in this moment, Luke is terrified because he's like, we have to stay together. We have to stay together. We're finally in this together. We can't separate. And we hear them saying, he's legal. Dump him at the border. Now, I would like to believe that means that they're going to dump him alive at the border, but apparently because of all of the adrenaline and everything else, June and Luke don't hear this, and they are afraid, and they are panicked, and Luke gets put into the vehicle, and June gets put onto a bus, and she's just like screaming, where are they taking him? Where are they taking him? And I'm like, girl, you didn't just hear them say they're going to dump him at the border? Like, he's going to be good. He's going to make his way back to Moira and Nicole. He'll be okay. But, which is what I'm assuming, knock on wood, right? We hope that they don't actually like do anything horrible to Luke. But June gives this narrative kind of voiceover where she talks about dying and not knowing how death is going to come. Now, never in a million years do I think that the show thinks that we are going to be naive enough to believe that June is dying. For one, we already know the show's been renewed for another season. Two, June is your main character. And until the show, in my opinion, starts to switch narrative voices, like giving us, like how Grey's Anatomy has in the past, at least, had other people other than Meredith voice over the episode, so that if and when she does leave, we are at least used to having other people do voiceovers. And oftentimes they will have the person who's exiting the show for that episode do the voiceover. Until this show starts doing something like that, you will never get me to believe that June is dying until the last episode, because she is our protagonist, our POV shot. We are the one who we see the world through her eyes. Even when we're seeing other characters, we see the main world of Gilead through June's eyes. So that's just me. That is just my, call it, television-esque / film expertise. I just don't see that happening. And I think that if that were to happen, it would be such a mishandling of the story. Until we get those types of things, it would be very much a misdirect. So her whole little spiel here about not knowing how you're going to die has, to me, more to do with what's to come in the future and how things will play out later, not necessarily for now. And so back in Canada, Serena is meeting with Commander Wheeler, Mr. Wheeler, and thinking that he's going to confront her about her tumultuous conversation with his wife. And he's like, no, guess what? Big surprise, which we always saw this from the clip from last week's from the trailer. But we've got June Osborne, and she starts crying. She's like, finally, I don't have to worry about her. And he's like, oh, I'm going to have Ezra put her down because I don't trust Gilead. That is a very powerful statement for him to outwardly admit that he does not trust Gilead to do the right thing with her. Shows that he, being an outsider, sees that there are some flaws in Gilead's system. And I definitely think that's something that perhaps if Serena plays her cards right, she can use that to her advantage. But she instead cries and says, I want to go. I want to see this. And oddly enough, for all of their, like, you must be on bed rest, you can't walk around the house stuff, he's like, okay, I'm going to let you go. And so she gets in the car and rides with Ezra to go and meet June. And so now we know what is going to happen with June. Ezra is supposed to be handling June, and Serena's going to watch. One of the best scenes in Handmaid's Tale, these two women, whenever they come face to face, is so dynamic, the way that they play off of each other. And Serena sees June about to be taken out by Ezra, who probably would have just done it one shot clean and been done. But instead, he hesitates, she cries, and she's like, let me do it. No, Ezra, you have to let me do it. She's done so much to me. She killed my husband. Let me do it. And must say for Serena, like, she wasn't able to pull one over on Lawrence, but she's able to work some men over, and he gives her the gun, and she puts it to June's head, and she's like, I want you to pray. I want you to get down on your hands and knees. I want you to pray. And so she starts praying. And she's like, I pray for our children. I pray for our daughters. And in that moment, it reminds, I think, we don't know this, but I think not only does it is Serena so smart that she's putting things in her mind together, but I also think it reminds her that for the little bit of time that she was a mother to Nicole, that she had Nicole, and that June is Nicole's mother. And in that regard, she is not able to pull the trigger. That remembrance of, I could have killed you and your child point blank just the other day, so you owe me. And it reminds her of that. And instead of pulling the trigger at June, she pulls the trigger at Ezra. Now, Ezra had on a bulletproof vest. I don't like this. I don't know why they didn't let her kill that man, and why she didn't go back and shoot him one more time, because you're leaving witnesses. It's messy, love. You need to clean up the scene of the crime. But ultimately, she puts June in the car because she knows this is her chance to escape. If she goes back to Canada, she is definitely being stuck as a handmaid to the Wheelers. It's happening. She sees it. She knows it. She feels helpless and powerless. Not only that, but she's been in the back of that car. She's in labor. So she definitely does not want to have her baby be handed over to that woman. So she knows who her best chance of getting out, who's done it before, can do it again. It's June. And so she takes off with June because June can drive the car and she can manipulate June. Such a gratifying sequence. The together of the episode was not Luke and June together. It's June and Serena together. And I think ultimately, even though I said it last week, I'll say it again, I don't think there is a true redemption arc for Serena. She is the one who put a lot of this in play. However, if Gilead is going to be taken down, you need these pairs of people. You need Lawrence and Nick. You need Serena and June. You need them doing this together. A singular person can't take down Gilead. And who better than to take it down? Now, I really, really, really wish that they had killed Ezra, because how then could they have spun a story about Serena being like taken over by June, and or something like that, and making her way back to Gilead as a spy if she was really turned over. But there's obviously a different direction. I'm waiting for the surprise of it all. But our kill count for the episode, we got Commander Putnam, R.I.P. The one of the last the latter scenes of the episode is Aunt Lydia taking the other handmaids by the wall where his dead body has been strung up and labeled as a rapist. We know what they do to rapists in Gilead. And Janine saying she wished she could have seen it. So gratifying for her. That also tells Aunt Lydia that he has raped her. She's not going to ever, I don't think, at least not now, consider the ceremony as rape. But now that lets her know that he took advantage of her as well. And not just in the ceremony in the way we would think of it, but in other ways as well. Such a good episode, guys. So many things in play. So now we've got Luke back in Canada, perhaps, knock on wood, with Moira raising Nicole. We've got June and Serena out somewhere where she's about to have this little baby, and they got to figure out a way to get free. And hopefully they don't end up in Gilead together. Hopefully they end up back on the other side of things. We don't know. And you got Lawrence, Nick, and maybe Aunt Lydia coming up in the sneak attack. I don't know. I'm loving the direction of the show, but I definitely think, I don't think we're done with the Wheelers yet. So I want to know from you guys, what do you think is going to happen? Gilead, the major players of Gilead have got to come back into this. And I think definitely the biggest threat we have right now in terms of a villainous character for the show are the Wheelers, because they've positioned everyone else in kind of semi-sympathetic roles. So what do you think is going to happen in next week's episode? But I'm excited. I like this one, guys. This was a good one. Kudos. I definitely give this one like a 9.0. This was good. It was an A+ right here with this. Looking forward to next week's episode, and I hope you guys will come back. I know this video was kind of long, but come back and see me again next week so we can talk all things Handmaid's Tale. Until next time, guys. Love you. Toodles.